Greetings all, FerrariMan601 here. Last week, after months of patient anticipation, VRC released the third and final car in their much-heralded Formula North America pack, Formula NA 2018. Along with its Formula NA 1999 and 2012 stablemates, Formula NA 2018 seeks to recreate the car used in North America's premier open-wheel category, IndyCar. This car, of course, is heavily modeled after the Dallara IR18 aero kit and DW12 chassis, which constituted a new spec configuration for IndyCar beginning in 2018. As with the two other cars in this pack, this 2018 variant is supplied in both road course and oval variants. The road spec can be seen here. Many of you, I am well aware, may not be as familiar with IndyCar as you may be with other more internationally recognized disciplines, but IndyCar, in my assertion, is on the precipice of a resurgence and a potential worldwide expansion within the next few years. So this really is the time to get acquainted with this series, and of course, with this car. Regarding the aforementioned car, this, my incomparably beloved audience, is it. It is the Dallara DW12 IR18. The IndyCar series is a spec formula, and as such, all entrants in the championship, as well as one-off entries for the Indianapolis 500, for example, run this chassis and aero specification. The car's history and nomenclature can present a bit of confusion at first glance, but here's the rundown. For the 2012 season, IndyCar commissioned Dallara to develop a new chassis, one that would integrate the very latest advancements in safety and aerodynamic technology. After several years of design and on-track testing work, much of which was conducted by the late and great Dan Weldon, who ironically would be killed in the last race to feature the outdated and safety marginal IR05 chassis, the DW12, bearing Weldon's initials in his honor, debuted in the first round of the 2012 IndyCar Championship. From 2012 to 2017, the aerodynamic specification of the DW12 was tweaked somewhat, with teams able to have some leeway regarding the finer areas of development of cascade elements on the front wings, wing end fences, and dive planes, as well as the floor and side pods. This overall solution yielded a topside aero wing car in similar fashion to a Formula 1 car. Overall levels of downforce were actually comparable to 2014 and 2016 Formula 1. The 2017 regulation changes, of course, saw Formula 1 pull far ahead in that regard. Being a spec series, though, IndyCar saw the potential for significant cost overruns by allowing teams extended developmental freedom in the aerodynamic department. Thus, a new, entirely standardized aero kit for both ovals and road courses was developed. Simultaneously, IndyCar also wanted to address two additional concerns: the aesthetics of the cars and the issue of dirty air. For the IR18, a back-to-basics approach was utilized. Gone are the complex front wings, gone are the rear wheel fairings, and gone is the engine air intake snorkel. In their places are a single mainplane front wing, a mid-2000s F1-style flow modifier ahead of the rear axle, a 1980s-look roll hoop, and an airfoil-shaped undertray replete with Venturi tunnels. Rather than depending on topside wings for downforce generation, IndyCar has once more looked to ground effect for downforce, and this decision has coincided with a great improvement in on-track action. Less reliance on topside-mounted wings means that more consistent downforce may be generated even when cars are following closely nose to tail, such as on high-speed oval circuits. The airfoil undertray and Venturi tunnels are far less sensitive to turbulence and less likely to become damaged from incidental contact with other cars as well, thus enabling drivers to commit to maneuvers that otherwise may have given them pause. The ultimate result, the 2010 IndyCar season, was one of the most competitive in recent years, setting the stage for more excitement to come in 2019 and beyond. Now, let's just take a look at the technical specifications on the IR18, as well as survey the absolutely spectacular work that VRC have done on their rendition of the car. What we see before us presently is the road course spec of the IR18. For larger superspeedway oval circuits, significantly smaller front and rear wings will be fitted, but the overall specification of the chassis and running gear remains essentially unchanged. Powering the beast is a 2.2-liter twin-turbo V6 developed by IndyCar's two current engine suppliers, Chevrolet and Honda. Both engines are essentially identical in specification, despite displaying differences in the packaging of ancillary electronics, for example. The engines produce between 550 and 760 horsepower, depending on the boost pressure limits imposed for a given circuit. Ovals, for example, use far less boost than road courses. That power generated by those 2.2-liter V6s is sent to the rear axle via an X-Track specification 1011 6-speed paddle-shifted sequential gearbox. The wheels, they're 15-inch diameter aluminum or magnesium alloy wheels. Tires are bespoke Firestone slick compounds with a wet compound available for running on road courses in the rain. The overall package is contained within an all-carbon construction, with all chassis running gear bolting onto a carbon monocoque, just like a Formula One car. Overall dimensions, the car is exactly 5 meters long, it's 2,011 millimeters wide, and weighs 721 kilograms on super speedways and 735 kilograms on short ovals and all road courses. All this comes together to yield a package that is only 1 kilogram heavier than a Formula One car in road course configuration, but down by roughly 300 horsepower. What all of this means is that these cars, they handle quite similarly in terms of their chassis dynamics to a modern Formula One car, given that the weights are very similar between those two disciplines. But these cars do have a lot less downforce than a current Formula One car. Look at a 2018 Formula One car, see what Kimi Räikkönen was able to do at Monza, doing a 119 and a little bit of change. Crazy amount of downforce in Formula One nowadays. IndyCar, not as much, but they do have that ground effect. They do have that underbody working for them. This means that these cars are going to be much more finely balanced in high-speed corners than a Formula One car is, but it also means that, well, they can be a little bit twitchy, meaning that you've got to drive these things. You've really got to be on top of them. Add to the equation that these cars don't have power steering, and you're really in for a rough time when it comes to wrestling these things around a corner. But I do have to say, the IndyCar series in 2017 and now particularly 2018 introducing the IR18 Aero kit, it really has come back to life, and there are plans for the near future, 2020, 2021, to bring these engines up to over 900 horsepower. That will really be spectacular. They're also going to be raising the displacement a little bit on these V6 engines, going from 2.2 liters to 2.4 liters. So lots more horsepower, even louder engines on the way for IndyCar. As far as the DW12 chassis and the current Aero kit, we'll probably see some more evolution, if you will, in terms of the aerodynamic philosophy, but the ground effect is going to remain, and the relatively small front and rear wings are also going to remain. These cars are going to maintain themselves as being ground effect cars rather than trying to pursue too much topside aero. Anyway, VRC, of course, this car was in development for a long time. This is the last one to come in the Formula North America pack, but definitely it is one that has been worth the wait, I must say. Just once again, take a look at what VRC have been able to give us here. So much detail going on inside and outside this absolutely brilliant car. Of course, I have seen these cars running in real life. I have stood pretty much about this close to one on a couple of occasions when I went to the IndyCar race at Pocono this year. So yes, I have to say VRC have done an absolutely brilliant job with this car, as they have done with not only the other cars in the Formula North America pack, but with every other car that they have ever given us. These guys are among the best in the business. Certainly, they do not disappoint yet again. Having a closer look at the car now, we'll take a look at the front end and show you what's what here. You can see that front wing that we're talking about. You can see what we were talking about earlier with it being a single main plane. We have some flap elements on this wing, sure, but not nearly as many as you might expect to see on a Formula One wing. You can see here, if we hit the 0 key on the numpad here in showroom view, you can see how those cascade flaps go up and down, and an upper flap element is added to either side of the wing. But you don't see 8 different levels of front wing like you would see in a Formula One car. Here, in the lowest specification here in terms of front downforce on a road circuit, well, that's it. Single main plane, 2 flaps, 1 on either side. Ratchet the downforce up, you add a second set of upper flaps, but that's it. The wing is what it is. This one is basically a carryover from what IndyCar were running from 2012 to 2017 with the DW12 Aero kit. Moving across the front end of the car now, moving rears, you can see the front suspension arrangement, double wishbone pushrod, just like we see in Formula 1. Also, I do want to point out this little ridge that runs down the whole front end of the monocoque. This is not some sort of manufacturing defect, nor is it something that's done for style. When these cars are running at high speeds, particularly on oval circuits, it is not uncommon to see contact between two cars, and one of those cars in that situation is going to go sideways for the most part. When the car goes sideways, there is a potential, looking at the outer lip of the floor here, there is certainly the potential to get these cars airborne. You can see the airfoil shape of the underbody. We'll take a closer look at this in a little while, but you can see how we just have this curved cross-section around the edge of the floor. If air gets up underneath the floor, the car is going to go sideways and it's going to go airborne. So, enter this little strake running down the front of the monocoque. You can compare it to the NASCAR root flaps if you want, but for the most part, this is just there as a spoiler. It's there to provide some positive pressure, some more downforce, if you will, in the situation that the car goes sideways. It will keep the front end on the ground, and therefore it'll keep the whole car on the ground. And really, since 2011, when we unfortunately lost Dan Weldon in an airborne accident, we have seen a very large reduction in airborne crashes in IndyCar, particularly on those super speedways. So that is a very good development and smart thinking on the part of Dallara and IndyCar. Taking a look at the midsection of the chassis now, you can see this big panel here that is bearing the number 12. That's just so it's a removable section, of course. Mechanics could make adjustments to the steering rack, the dampers there. Just like you'd see in a Formula 1 car, you get the dampers mounted longitudinally there. They're laid down on their side just to take them out of the airstream. Of course, the pushrod suspension arrangement, as you can see there. Looking toward the cockpit, looks pretty much like you'd expect a cockpit to look, but there is some great detail inside there, and of course we will take a closer look at the cockpit in just a couple of minutes. Taking a look at the mirrors there, pretty much where you'd expect them to be. Of course, no halo in IndyCar, and there will never be halo in IndyCar. It's not to say that they will not evaluate some form of frontal penetration protection, be it from debris or wheels or whatever, but halo, not going to work for IndyCar, so they're still developing ideas. Taking a look toward the back of the monocoque here, you can see the fuel filler valve. Unlike on Formula 1 cars, when we had refueling in Formula 1, there is no hydraulically actuated hatch that will open and close over the fuel valve. It just remains open, exposed to the airstream all the time. Of course, it makes the pit stops a little bit more intricate doing refueling, but they tend to do pretty well in IndyCar with those pit stops. So, yep, refueling in IndyCar, and of course, fuel strategy is very important, particularly on those longer oval races on the super speedways, where you can actually save more fuel than you might expect just by breathing off of the throttle a little bit earlier into the corners. Looking across the midsection here, there is the lower profile of the outer floor, and of course we will take a little bit of a look underneath in a couple of minutes. Moving up, the side pods there, not nearly as sculpted in terms of the undercuts that we see on modern Formula 1 side pods, but nicely shaped, and of course they do have to integrate big time lateral impact absorption structures, because as we saw at Pocono this year with Robert Wickens and Ryan Hunter-Reay getting together, those impacts laterally, the 90-degree T-bone style accidents, they can do a lot of damage, and the cars do need to be able to resist them. Unfortunately, Robert Wickens, he didn't fare so well in that incident, but he is still with us and he will make a recovery, so the car did its job. Moving rears, you can see the flick-ups in front of the rear axle. These are similar to similar structures that we saw in Formula 1 in the mid-2000s, where they just had these scoops that came off of the trailing edge of the side pod and they flicked the air up over the rear wheels. Exactly the same philosophy here, but IndyCar has gone one step further. If we take a look at that structure from the front, you can see that not only are we channeling air off of the top side of the side pod and then over the rear axle like this, but we are also taking a step back and funneling air around the side pod. You can see where the air would attach itself around the bottom side of the side pod, and then via Coanda effect, you would see how it could feed the top side of the diffuser, which of course we will get into in a moment when we take a look at the rear. So, similar structure, but it's a twofold solution to a twofold problem. Very cool to see that. Again, good thinking and good design on the part of Dallara. Moving across to the rear axle, nice tire textures and nice wheel textures by VRC, and then moving toward the rear. Here is that underbody that we've been talking about. You can see this is just the rear end of the car, the rear end of the diffuser, and you can see just how big these diffusers are compared to a Formula 1 diffuser. Again, this is a ground effect car for the most part, so you want to get as much air as you can through that under tray, accelerate it through the bottom of the car, and then let it expand as it shoots out. When that air expands, of course, you're going to get a drop in speed, but you're also going to get a drop in pressure, meaning that the car gets sucked down to the road from underneath. So you're generating that negative pressure in the under tray rather than generating positive pressure and drag on the top side of the car like we have in a modern Formula 1 solution. Very similar to a modern Formula 1 solution, though, is the rear crash structure. This is a very interesting bit of kit. You can see here we can press the number 7 on the numpad and we can turn on the rear light. This light comes on whenever a yellow flag is thrown. Whenever there is a full course yellow and the safety car is called out, and that's the default caution solution for an oval race, you'll see these lights come on and they'll just start flashing all by themselves on every car. But, of course, we can turn it on and off here. What's more interesting, though, the rear crash structure, it is integrated with the rear wing. It is all one piece. And right behind the rear crash structure is the gearbox, meaning that if these guys ever need to make a ratio adjustment or a flat-out gearbox change, all they need to do is undo 4 bolts that are holding the rear crash structure and rear wing onto the back of the gearbox, and then they undo another couple of bolts. I think I counted 6 bolts when I was at Pocono, and then the gearbox casing comes off, and the gear stack just pulls right out. It's in a little cartridge cassette, if you will, and they can take the old cassette out, they can put a new cassette in, they can do a ratio change or a complete gearbox change, save for the gearbox casing, in about 10 minutes. Absolutely wonderful integration, wonderful ergonomics in terms of how the mechanics have to work on these cars. It's really impressive to watch. I got to watch Penske do a gearbox change at Pocono this year. Yeah, they're impressive, and also really impressive to see just how nicely everything fits together and how clean these cars really are. You would think taking the gearbox apart there would be oil all over the place. Nope, not really. Drain it all out, pull it out, clean as a whistle inside. It's wonderful. Taking a look closer at the rear zone of the car, you can see the exhaust coming out from that 2.2 liter V6 power unit. Don't call it a power unit, it's an engine. I like engines, but yes, of course, twin turbochargers, so 1 for each bank of 3 cylinders, so there are 2 exhausts. Very nice. And also when you get in close, you can see the prop shafts here coming out from the differential and to the rear axle there. Very nice. And of course our rear suspension, which is also double wishbone push rod, just like the front. Here, you see this little horn, this funnel section here. What's this for? No, it's not for the turbo wastegates. What that little funnel is for, this is actually for the air jack system. They'd be able to plug an air line into there, and 4 little jack pedestals which are mounted in the under tray down here. And while we're down here, let's take a look at the under tray. As you can see, very dark back here, of course, but yep, you can see that profile with the 2 tunnels. There are 4 little pedestals that will just shoot out on pneumatic cylinders out from the bottom of the car, and that is how they jack these cars up. If you watch an IndyCar pit stop, you will not see jackmen. No jackmen on the front and rear wheels. That means the car can jack itself up. So that's fewer guys needed in the pit lane to do a pit stop. Maybe Formula 1 should take note of that. But anyway, pulling back out, it is absolutely wonderful to see what VRC have done with this car. Again, we always praise them for their modding work, but really, I have to do so again. It is an absolutely fantastic package. Of course, we do have to take a look in the cockpit, so let's hit the enter key and let's fly in. Here we are. Now we're sitting a bit far back and we're also sitting a bit low, but you can get an idea of what's going on in here. Taking a look around, you can see it's pretty Spartan, but you can see the detail there, the weave of that carbon fiber monocoque. It is built like a tank. Over here on the left-hand side of the bulkhead, you can see 2 levers there. No, that's not a gear lever. That is an adjustment for the anti-roll bars. I believe the left-hand side is for the front axle and the right-hand side is for the rear axle. The driver could adjust the stiffness of the anti-roll bars as he's going around on track. This, of course, very important in any situation, but particularly on ovals as the fuel load burns down and as the tires wear out, the balance of the car can change quite substantially, so the driver has some more tools in the cockpit to try and fine-tune the balance. Of course, the best way to change the balance is to make a pit stop, but if you're not allowed to do that for any reason, let's say you just made a stop and you're not happy, play with the anti-roll bars, and maybe you'll find a sweet spot. Over here on the right-hand side, just the fire extinguisher handle there. Of course, you wouldn't touch that unless things have gone very wrong at the back. And then, of course, the steering wheel. When we fire the car up, we're going to get a lot of information on the steering wheel, and we'll go through that once we're out on track. But definitely, it is a very sophisticated piece of technology, quite comparable to a modern Formula 1 steering wheel with that LCD screen there, front and center, again displaying tons of information. Of course, depending on the driver's preferences, they could run a bespoke steering wheel molded to their hands or just fitted a little bit better within the dimensions of the cockpit, but all the cars come stock with this steering wheel. In the real world, it's put together by Cosworth, but drivers, of course, are allowed to customize that to their heart's content. Taking a look around the seat area, we can see that we have got great seatbelt detail by VRC, nice buckles and great fabric textures there on the seatbelts. Of course, we do have the molded carbon seat in here as well, pretty much just like a Formula 1 seat. Moving around to the back side, there is the little cushion at the back to stop the driver's head from bouncing against the back of the chassis, and on the sides here as well, there is that cockpit surround. Not quite as high as it is on a modern Formula 1 car, but same philosophy. You want to contain the driver's head and neck movement laterally. Of course, for the longitudinal movements, they're wearing the Hans device, but those lateral movements, you're just trying to contain the motion, trying to keep the driver from getting any sort of neck fractures. Moving across to the back here, there is not our air snorkel, that's just our roll bar there. The engine is fed from the side pods, twin turbo, so air snorkel's kind of redundant. And then, of course, the back side of the cockpit and going back to front and center. Very nice, and it's a great vantage point from which to drive a car to. Really don't have too many obstructions in here. You get a great view of the whole racetrack. Fly back out one more time. And we'll just take one final look here at the IR18. Again, absolutely brilliant car. The driving experience, as you're going to see, it is second to none. No, it's not as fast as a Formula 1 car, but it is a whole lot more fun. To have some fun driving this car, we are going to take it to Mugello here in the road spec. I'm choosing Mugello because it is quite representative of a lot of the road courses that we have here in America. We have long flowing corners, we've got long straights, we don't have a lot of runoff. It's not quite like the current European circuits where you have a lot of chicanes and 90-degree hairpin turns. It's a nice flowing circuit. That's how a lot of the road courses are in America, and of course that's where IndyCar is racing, so I feel it's representative. At any rate, we will see you at Mugello next.
Welcome to Mugello. Before we get out on track, of course, we're going to take a look at the setup screen and show you just what's going on here setup-wise on the Formula NA 2018. Into the pit screen here, what do we see? Well, we see the typical Assetto Corsa setup screens. First, on the gear display, we have our 6-speed semi-automatic box, first through 6th gear, adjustable to your heart's content as is final drive, default values shown. Tires, we have 2 tire compounds to choose from. Here for the road course, we have a prime compound and an alternate compound. Of course, VRC going the safe route, considering this is pay-wear. They're calling the tires Fire Bridge. However, of course, they would be called Firestones and branded as such. Prime is the harder compound, and alternate is the softer compound. In IndyCar on the road courses, if you see the cars running a red sidewall, that means they're on the alternate, softer compound. Tire pressures, default values shown, 18 psi across the front axle and 17 psi across the rear. The range of adjustment goes from 16 psi up to 20 psi, so a relatively small window there of adjusting your tire pressure. Fuel zeroed out to keep the engine quiet. Maximum capacity is 70 liters though. Of course, you will be making pit stops for fuel and tires during a full-length race. Aero screen front and rear wings are adjustable. The front wing only has one set of adjustments here, as you can see, with the default 6 value there. If we zero it out, you'll see that we have that upper flap that we saw in showroom view. That's going away between steps 2 and 3. And if we really bring the downforce up, you can see just how high the angle of attack can get there on the front wing. Bring that back to default there, 6 out of 12. The rear wing, of course, also adjustable, and you will see that change in its visual angle of attack. We go into the free camera for a moment. Here is the rear wing, and as I make the adjustments, watch what happens. On the main plane, you will see that, well, the main plane, the largest flap element of the wing, that will go up and down in its angle of attack as I round the downforce up and down. But we also have upper flaps. Making those adjustments now, we're down to 0. You'll see as we go between steps 1 and 2, a third top flap element comes in. And then, of course, the angle of attack on those upper flaps will also change depending on what we're doing with the wings. Very cool and, of course, a very nice touch. One final adjustment that we can make here, though, the diffuser. If we go back to the rear end, a little bit difficult to see with all of the windows here, but watch the inboard strakes there on the diffuser. If we go to step 0, you'll see that they disappear. Go back to step 1, hey, they're back again. Yes, all of that does have an impact in terms of how much downforce you've got. Alignment settings, camber and tow, adjustable to your heart's content on all 4 corners, default values shown. Drivetrain, here's where you're making your differential adjustments in power, coast, and preload. Generic, brake bias defaults to 57% to the front axle, brake power 100%, and steering assist, that's your power steering, defaults to 100. Suspension on the damper settings, here you go, a menagerie of dampers for your liking. Your bound and rebound, fast and slow on all 4 corners, infinitely adjustable there. The main suspension settings, here's where you get the front and rear anti-roll bars, as well as your ride heights and wheel rates. Travel settings on the suspension, basically this is the push rod length on all 4 corners, you can change that there. And in addition to that, you have the heave spring, front and rear as well. That's your third spring there to control the moments of heave, basically, as the car's going up and down vertically over the bumps. Finally, pit stop strategy, you don't have any other additions apart from what you get in any other car in Assetto Corsa. In any regard, we will go and load up a setup that I've got already set to go for this track. It's based on basically the same setup that I ran toward the end of the live stream a week ago when we got this car. But you can see we're running on the alternate compounds there. We have got enough fuel to do about 10 laps around this place, and pretty high downforce for this circuit as well. Remember, this car doesn't have as much topside aero as a Formula 1 car, so you are relying on the under tray. The problem is, it doesn't really do much in terms of ground effect until you have some considerable speed built up, so you do need wing angle to get you through the lower speed corners. Anyway, into the cockpit. Now that we have the entire car brought to life, you can see the instrumentation on our steering wheel display. First, across the top, you'll see 2380. That is our tachometer. That is showing us idle speed right now, idling at 2,380 RPM. In the left-hand window, we have fuel and 4.6. That is our fuel level in liters. Below that, you see perf. Right now, you've just got 3 blank lines. That will show us your live delta, your current lap compared to your previous best. To the right side in the yellow box, you can see current lap. That's our current lap time ticking away, and it will also display your previous lap time once you've turned a previous lap. Front and center there, of course, you've got your gear display. We're in neutral right now. Of course, goes all the way up through the box into 6th gear, and then all the way down again into reverse. Below that in the center, you've got your speed. That will be displaying our speed in kilometers per hour. Over on the bottom left in the purple box, you can see P2P and 10 on that top line. That is this car's push-to-pass system. In IndyCar, they have a system that will enable the drivers to push a button, and they get about a 40 horsepower boost for 20 seconds. That's what they call push-to-pass. It's the same idea as DRS in Formula 1, but this acts on engine power rather than aerodynamic drag. You get 10 of them per session here. It's enabled for practice and qualifying here in Assetto Corsa. In races as well, in IndyCar, they get an allotment of push to pass, either out of an overall time or out of a number of squirts there. Again, 20 seconds each time. Once it's hit, it's on no matter what you're doing. It's not like a DRS where it cancels if you hit the brake. You have the extra boost for the 20 seconds, and then I believe there's another 20-second waiting period before you can get back onto the push to pass. Below that line in the purple box, position indicator, POS, and 0-1. We're the only car out on track. Finally, in the lower right, you have our tire pressures. Obviously, this is showing the tire pressures given the tire temperature as well. So tires are in the blankets. That means pressures are going to go up. That basically covers the instrumentation. You can see the 2 pairs of 3 flashing blue lights. That tells us the pit lane speed limiter is active, and above that we will have shift lights across the top of the steering wheel. That just about covers it in terms of what we've got going on in the cockpit. For the benefit of you, my beloved audience, we will bring up the pedal trace so that you can see what's going on with our inputs. Other than that, though, well, there's really not all that much to talk about. All the other instrumentation that we're going to want to be paying attention to is already on the steering wheel. So, without further ado, let's get this absolutely wonderful car out on track and take a little look at how it goes. Get up and down through the box a couple of times, and we'll start building some tire temperature and brake temperature. There's full revs. Red line is at 12,000 RPM. And you're probably already able to notice the sound of this car is very nice. It's a very airy, throaty sort of sound, something that's actually quite similar to what the Formula One V6s were sounding like in the mid-1980s. Of course, when they were running twin turbos as well. This car is twin turbo. Formula One nowadays, a significantly smaller engine than this. Formula One has 1.6 liters, we've got 2.2, but the big difference is we have 2 turbochargers, one for each bank. Formula One, they're funneling the exhaust from all 6 cylinders into a single turbine. That is going to cause the much quieter and much less interesting sound that we get from Formula One engines today. I think we've got sufficient tire temperature to start to wring this thing out a little bit. Lap time there at 9:32.833. Yeah. Obviously, not indicative of anything. Alright, now that we're starting to build up to some respectable pace, first thing that strikes somebody when driving this car for the first couple of times is just how connected you are to everything that's going on. We mentioned in showroom view that this car does not have things like power steering, and it definitely shows here. The steering weight is very nice. It's actually a little bit lighter than I was anticipating out of the box in this car. It's certainly a lot lighter than the iRacing version of the IR18. But the steering nonetheless is very direct. The force feedback is extremely detailed. You get great effects over the curbs, great effects over the bumps. You know exactly where all 4 corners of this car are at all times. Lots of great information coming in through your hands here. Similarly, going in the order of where the controls are, on the steering wheel we've also got our shift paddles. The gearbox feels very nice. It's very peachy. Shift times, well, they're not quite comparable to a modern F1 gearbox, but, you know, then again, this thing has to do, I don't know, something like 2,000 miles or so before a significant rebuild, so shift times are down a bit on a Formula One box, but still very direct, very precise. I mean, you know, as precise as you can describe a paddle shift box as being, because you can't miss a gear, really. do get a very nice auto cut on the upshifts and a nice auto blip on the downshifts, courtesy of the ECU, so no stabbing at the gas under braking for us. Similarly, in terms of how the rear end feels when you get on the power, the differential is great. I've slackened it off quite a bit, mostly because I like to play with the throttle through the long, medium speed corners like you're sort of seeing me do now. I don't like the differential to lock too early because that really does hamper my ability to do that. I like to balance the car in terms of its longitudinal weight transfer through a corner, so that's why I do what I do with the throttle a lot of times. You need a slack differential to make that work. At the end of the straight, we have a big braking zone. What do the brakes feel like? Well, as you can see, they are very powerful and they are very good. Of course, they are carbon-carbon brakes, just like you get on a Formula 1 car, so they like to be hot. They have a very high working range, but it's also at a very high base operating temperature, so you do have to get heat into the brakes. Those of you used to Formula 1 cars, you're used to this. But now, we get to talk about chassis dynamics, and this is where, yes, there are some similarities with F1, but it's also where we start to get some diversion. Obviously, the suspension configuration, double wishbone pushrod, it's basically like mid-90s to mid-2000s Formula 1 car in terms of the overall suspension configuration, double wishbone pushrod. But that's where the similarities end. Car is just over 2 meters wide, so it's slightly wider than a current Formula 1 car. Again, not by much, as we're going to stuff it, aren't we, or not? Yep, just keep it out of the barriers. There we go. We'll get into why that happened in a moment. But suspension, double wishbone pushrod. The car is just about as wide as a modern F1 car. Does mean that it's pretty planted through the corners, except for what just happened there. But you've also got to remember that we are dealing with an airfoil undertray. We have got ground effect on this car. This means that the overall center of pressure aerodynamically is quite different than it is on a current F1 car. If you want to draw F1 comparisons, now you've got to go all the way back to the late 70s and early 80s. That underwing, as IndyCar call it, that means that this car is generating the majority of its downforce with the floor. So the front and rear wings, even though they are important, particularly on the road courses, they don't do as much as you might expect. That's why we're actually running pretty high downforce in terms of the wing settings, because really they're not that efficient. It is the floor that is doing most of this car's gripping, or shall I say sucking, yes. Long high-speed corners like this double apex right-hander, for example. Big ground effect corners. You can really feel the car hunkering down into the tarmac through there. And what's interesting is, those of you who have driven the RSS Formula 79, you'll know that at high speeds, that car really does hunker down into the tarmac. This has a very similar feeling, I must say, but it only works at high speed. At the lower speed stuff, it's all driven by the front and rear wings, and they're not that great. So, through that chicane that we just went through, the lap before we had a little bit of a half spin and off-track excursion. The reason for that is, the speeds there are just barely high enough to get the undertray working well. So the car is in that transitional zone between going from a conventional wing car to a ground effect underbody aero car. That means you can get sudden and abrupt and violent balance changes from time to time, and that's exactly what happened to us there. Once everything does stabilize, though, it is absolutely glued to the ground. Remember Mario Andretti back in the 80s, late 70s actually, when Lotus unveiled the Lotus 79, he described it as being painted to the tarmac, and that's what this car is like at high speed as well. That was too much throttle on my part. And again, we keep it out of the wall. That's good. You see what I mean, though? It is susceptible to to sudden changes in the overall balance, and that is all aero. It makes these cars twitchy on the limit. Down to these first couple of corners, beginning the lap. You do have to be careful on the throttle. The engine, it's not that torquey, all things considered. I would say, well, it's a hard comparison to make. I was going to say it has more torque than a Formula 1 engine, and it does, but this car also doesn't have any hybrid systems. So the engine itself, yeah, higher displacement, it's going to be generating some more torque. 2 turbos, yep, more torque still, but no hybrid system. A Formula 1 car with the hybrid systems, with the electric motor at the rear axle, yeah, that's giving you instant torque, and it's giving you an unusable amount of instant torque. Taking that out of the equation, though, yeah, it's a little bit of a torque monster, this thing. You do have to be careful on the throttle, particularly out of the low and medium speed corners. In terms of steering input, it likes you to be as smooth as possible. Doesn't like sudden changes of direction. Again, the car is a little bit heavy, about 734 kilograms thereabout. So it does have high moments of inertia. Obviously, in a straight line, the big brakes, they take care of that without too much of a problem. But into the corners, as you saw there, and again here, when it does start to get out of shape, you have a big pendulum at the back. And I'm not particularly happy with where the balance is, if you haven't been able to figure that out by now. We've got the rear tires overheated a bit now. Take it easy through the next few corners, let the temperatures come down a bit on the rear axle. See the rear tire pressures up to 23 psi now, the fronts are at 20. Car is a little bit sensitive to tire temperatures. If you do get them too hot, the slip angle just goes to absolutely 0, and the instant you get sideways, you've lost it. But you keep it within its happy range, and you've got a lot of grip. So it does require a bit of fine-tuning. It does require a bit of observance on the part of the driver. But once you get your head around it, the performance does come to you. The overall quality that I really love about this car, though, is it's a proper driver's car. You don't have all the electronics to worry about. You don't have all the hybrid systems to worry about. There's no DRS. You have push to pass, which is this. No drama, just closes down the wastegates on the turbos temporarily, gives you a little bit more horsepower. Again, it's about a 40 horsepower boost. But other than that, you've got no gizmos to worry about, no gadgets to worry about. You're not going to have engineers getting on the radio to you in this thing and saying, Mode 6, fail, 17, confirm, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no. You've got 2 pedals and that's about it. Make it work. And also having no power steering means that your connection to it, relative to force feedback and things like that, very visceral, very raw, very unfiltered. You definitely know what's going on underneath you. feel like the car needs a little bit more rear downforce. Or perhaps we have a little too much front wing. It's quite possible. Yep, see what I mean there? Definitely not going to sit here and try to tell you it's an easy car to drive because, well, as you can see, it's not at times. Requires a lot of precision, it requires a lot of awareness. But the other thing that throws a wrench into the brains of the IndyCar drivers is maybe one week they're on a track like this, permanent road circuit, a lot of long, fast and flowing corners. Next week they might be running around the public roads of St. Petersburg, Florida. And another week they might be doing 230 miles an hour flat out down start to finish at Indianapolis. I mean, they are going to incredibly diverse venues, incredibly different racetracks with incredibly different demands. And the way that not only the drivers but the car has to be adapted to do those different things, and it does them all equally well, it's absolutely fantastic that they're able to get a platform that stable on all of those circuits in all of those different situations. It's really fantastic. Quick pit stop for you. Nice pit crew animations there. And you can see what's going on with all of that. I do want to make a slight wing adjustment. Do a little bit more rear downforce. Not a lot. Just a touch, because it is getting a bit too unstable too often for my liking. And again, once you overheat the tires, you're just off. He says as he doesn't burn out of the pits. There we go. There's the consistent grip. Yep, we're flat now through there. We were not flat before. Now it's going to do what I want. Push to pass. There we are. See, we'll get pretty close to VMAX now with the extra horsepower. Again, red line at 12,000. We're at 11.8, 11.9 thereabout. On the brakes. Ground effect coming in. Nice. More ground effects. power, push to pass. Third gear, diving downhill. On the throttle, push to pass still active. Just going all over the curves and the chicane, on the brakes, turning in. Feeding the power in, full power. Sixth gear, bouncing off the limiter there out of fifth. 129.655, I believe that was. Now that is how the car should be driving. Yep, now we're really beginning to push it. See what I mean? You've got to get your head around it, and even though I've been driving this car for a week already, I'm still learning about stuff. We made a right mess of the first sector of this lap, and we're still a 10th up on our last lap time. There's time to be found everywhere in this thing. It truly is the kind of car that rewards you for trying to find the limit. It rewards you for bravery. It also rewards you for being a good student. You've got to pay attention to what it wants to do. And of course, when you're going up against 20-something other ones, built identically, of course, you don't have a chassis advantage. That means that you've got to have a driver advantage. This car will reward detail-oriented drivers. It'll reward good engineers. It'll reward good strategists. Basically, the only thing this car won't do is disappoint you. And now back into the pit lane. Yes. Very, very nice looking car. See, it's got a little dirt and grime on it there from our off-track excursions, but it is absolutely fantastic. It's a great car on a road course. Honestly, the feedback you get through the steering is phenomenal. The throttle response is great. Even though it's turbocharged, you really don't get that much lag because you've got twin turbos there. They'll pretty much pick up each other's slack. Really, the most immersive part of this, though, it's really the sounds. I love the way that the throttles crack open when you start to get on the pedal. It gives you a nice bark out the back. It's great. Absolutely love all of that visceral stuff as well. And of course, the overall physics of the car. I mean, we just kind of did a little bit of ad hoc aero engineering there. Needed a little bit more rear downforce. We solved the problem. Really, it responds well to the changes you make, and we didn't even make that big of a change, and the car was completely different. It was so much more stable, adding that little bit more rear wing. So it really is a wonderful car. It's pretty technical, but it's also very approachable. I mean, the fact that you can do a handful of laps and start to figure out what do I like, what do I not like, what do I need, what could I do without. It's really great. It's very accessible, even though the level of performance that you get is pretty high. Of course, though, that's just one of this car's two personalities. It's a bipolar machine, of course, such as the IndyCar series. We've got road courses for a big section of the calendar, but we've also got big ovals as well. Of course, IndyCar and the roots of American racing, they do trace back to oval racing, particularly the Indianapolis 500, where of course this car runs, but not quite in this specification. What we're going to do next is take a look at this car's alter ego. Let's dress it up for a super speedway. We'll take a look in just a moment. Welcome back to Showroom View for just a moment. Yes, it is still the IR-18, but it looks a bit different now, doesn't it? Well, for the most part, the car is unchanged, but you can see we have now replaced the front and rear wings with much smaller variants thereof. This is all we've got now of the front wing, and you can see there, pressing the 0 on the numpad, that is your downforce adjustment. You pitch the whole wing up and down on both sides there, both main planes. Those upper flap elements are now completely gone, and you're just left with that single main plane. Here in the minimum downforce trim, you can see it basically just runs straight and level relative to the incoming airstream. The rest of the car, unchanged. Nothing else has been added or deleted across the floor section there, except for the big holes that are now present in the floor. That's to vent some more air if the car gets sideways. It's also to limit some of the ground effect downforce that you get. But coming across to the rear end, where's the rear wing? Honestly, where is it? It's gone for the most part. You've now just got this wing here, which, if you could even call it that, it's more of a spoiler than a wing. And of course you can see pressing the number 1 now on the numpad. Yeah, that's it. That's literally it. That's the full range of adjustment that you've got. I do want to just draw your attention, though, to the rear zone for a moment. As we make this adjustment, look, there are no flap elements that can actually be made on this. So, what you've got in terms of your adjustment, this is the support pylon for the rear wing. The whole thing just slides fore and aft, and that's how you make your adjustment. VRC, though, they are doing an absolutely ridiculous job with the detail here. Have a look at the back here. Watch the center nut, you could see. The whole thing spins on a shaft, and that is what will extend and retract the rear wing there to make that angle of attack adjustment. Absolutely insane level of detail, and I don't know if anybody else has noticed this yet, but there it is, the nut that makes the adjustment there on the strut for the rear wing. It spins, and it's absolutely glorious. But yeah, that's what we've got going on now on this thing. Everything else, all of the other fittings on the car, all the other bodywork, pretty much unchanged relative to the road specifications. So this is what we have got on the speedways. No changes in the cockpit, no changes at all. All the other changes happening under the skin. For our gearing, and you'll see this in a second, we have much longer gear ratios. We still have a 6-speed box, but the gaps between the gears are much larger and the gears themselves are much longer. So the top speeds are going to be a lot higher. Horsepower, it's going to be restricted a bit, 550 horsepower thereabout on the super speedways, but because we basically have no wings and the car is a bit lighter now in this spec, thanks to the fact that we have those smaller wings, the top speeds here are going to be a lot higher. We're going to be exceeding 360, 370 kilometers an hour with about 200 horsepower less. So that's the effect of drag. Of course, ground effect is still there, and given the wings that we now don't have on this car, that's going to be pretty much 100% of the downforce generation. But what we're going to do is take this car to South Star Speedway. That is the oval circuit included in the Formula North America pack by VRC. It's modeled after Texas Motor Speedway. When we reviewed Formula NA 1999, we also went there with that car, so same place, but with this version. Stand by. Welcome to South Star. Here we are with the IR-18 dressed up in its oval kit. Again, you saw what the car looks like now, basically just the smaller wings front and rear, but the setup screen is a little bit of a different story. Once again, the gear display, again, 6-speed box, but you can now see just how widely spaced these ratios are. We are exceeding 300 clicks in third gear, and then beyond that, the ratios do start to get a little bit closer together. Theoretically, we top out at 381 kilometers an hour there in sixth gear. Given the setup that we've got right now in the gearbox, we probably won't be getting into sixth gear unless we are in a really big draft, but most of the running will be done in fifth gear. Tires, we still have two compounds to choose from. We have a softer one and a harder one, but they are two very hard compounds because the speeds here on the ovals, they are absolutely ridiculous, so you need the tires to be robust enough to hold up to these speeds and cornering forces. You can see the tire pressures are much higher as well, 40 psi across the front axle, 38 across the rear. Our adjustment now goes between 32 and 42. Fuel, same fuel capacity as before because it is the same chassis, same 70-liter maximum capacity. Electronics, now we can adjust the turbocharger. We can go all the way down to 0 if we want, and of course all the way up to 100. Of course 100 means maximum boost. Aero, same adjustments that we can make with the exception of those secondary flaps on the rear wing. We can still run the diffuser strakes if we want to, although it does default without them. Front and rear wings, they do still change their angle of attack there visually, but again, it has a much smaller impact on the car's overall performance here because the under tray is generating most of our downforce. Same suspension adjustments, same brake bias adjustments. The brake power here, yes, it's at 100%, but the brakes that they run on the super speedways are so minuscule that you can get fully on the pedal and it still feels like they're not working. Obviously, the theory being you don't need the brakes on an oval. Same suspension adjustments, the same damper settings, and the same anti-roll bar settings that you can see here, just as we had on the road course trim. Other than that, though, the car is now very much trimmed out for top speed. We'll put 30 liters of fuel on board. We'll dive into the cockpit once more. And just as before, we will bring up our pedal trace just so you can see what's going on there. Same instrumentation in the cockpit, same steering wheel, same everything else, because once again, it is the same car, just dressed up in a slightly different costume. The performance, though, very, very different now in the oval spec. Let's take a look at what that's like. Got to be very careful pulling away because first gear is so long. Just look at this. And there's that gap between first and second. Similar gap between second and third. Again, very widely spaced ratios. Fourth gear, 330 clicks. 340, 350, 360, fifth gear. Through turns 1 and 2, completely flat, no problem. Turns 3 and 4. As the car revolves over the course of a run, you will have to start lifting through 3 and 4. 1 and 2 mostly remains flat, unless you're dealing with running in a very big pack with a lot of cars in front of you. Now you can see right now, very easily, we're doing the whole lap flat out. Lap time, 24.013. Lap times on an oval, they don't really matter all that much. For qualifying on the oval circuits, IndyCar does not set the grid by lap time. They set the grid by average speed. Now, of course, if you've got a lower average speed, you're much likely to have a slower lap time and a higher average speed, vice versa. For most oval races, they do 2 qualifying laps and they'll average the speed out over those 2 laps. For the Indy 500, the drivers actually do 4 qualifying laps, and then they'll do the average speed based off of 4 laps. You can see here, flat out in 5th gear, no problem at all. If we upshift into 6th, not too much of an RPM drop from 5th into 6th. We're still able to take these corners flat out. Slightly hindered acceleration, though, in 6th gear, as you might expect with the revs dropping a little bit lower. But if you do want to save fuel, running in the higher gear is something you can do. Of course, in the cockpit, we can adjust our turbocharger boost pressure. That will also come into fuel savings. Because you're not doing a lot of traditional driving here on ovals, in other words, you're not changing gear nearly as much, you're not braking at all under normal conditions, saving fuel really becomes an idea of adjusting turbocharger boost pressure as well as playing with the throttle, really. For example, if I want to save fuel, I can just breathe out of the throttle a little bit into the corners. And believe it or not, that'll actually go a long way in terms of saving fuel, because we're talking about distance covered. We're not necessarily talking about the all-out speed in which we're covering that distance. So a lot of times you'll see drivers just breathing out of the throttle as they're coming into the corners, and they'll be saving a lot of fuel doing that. We've sacrificed 2.5 tenths so far, going to be around 3.5 tenths by the time we get to the line, but that is a way that you can save fuel. In terms of the way the car is feeling, it is absolutely rock steady. I have no understeer really, no oversteer. It's absolutely staying exactly where I put it with minimal adjustment, minimal correction needed mid-corner. And of course, if we want to pick up the speed a little bit, there's 5th gear. We'll get a little bit better acceleration down the straight now. What is really the most impressive thing about running a car like this on an oval is the fact that this very same car, this very same chassis, could well have been running at Detroit, the Belle Isle street circuit, which is very bumpy with a lot of tight corners and lots of big braking zones. This car could well have been running at a place like that just 7 days prior to racing at a place like this. The level of adaptability and the level of plug-and-play integration that they have with this car is unreal, and it works very well. In a lot of other parts of the world, oval racing really isn't a thing. It is almost exclusively an American phenomenon. Something like that definitely does rub fans the wrong way. Oval racing just is not popular outside of the United States, and I completely understand why. It's fundamentally different from circuit racing. It's fundamentally different from a road course, for example. There's not nearly as much precision involved in a traditional sense on an oval. You're not braking, you're not changing gear, you don't have all of that stuff, but you have a lot of very close pack running. It is not uncommon at all to see these guys going wheel to wheel through a corner like this with a couple of inches between them. Yet they keep it together most of the time. That requires a lot of skill and a lot of bravery. If IndyCar is going to conquer the world, as I'm thinking it well might within the next few years, the rest of the world is going to have to warm up to oval racing a bit, because some people have been saying, well, if IndyCar wants to go international, they're going to have to get rid of ovals. I disagree. Oval racing is fundamental to American motorsport, and it's fundamental to IndyCar. The series gets its name from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the Indy 500. You're never going to get rid of ovals in IndyCar. What they will do in the future, I think, is they will continue to expand the calendar with more road courses and more temporary street circuits like St. Pete, like Belle Isle. Maybe we're going to see races in Argentina in the next couple of years. I remember seeing a news report a couple of weeks ago that they might be bringing a race to Buenos Aires in Argentina. There's a chance that they might go back to Hermanos Rodriguez in Mexico. There's also a chance, who knows, maybe IndyCar can go back to Brands Hatch over in the UK and really bring this series international, bring it to Europe, get it out of the Americas. It's very possible, and I'm certainly very excited about that prospect. IndyCar, in terms of the way that the series comports itself, it's not trying to be the most exclusive. It's not trying to be the all-out fastest. It's not trying to be the single best at every single thing. What it's doing is it's marketing a product and it's marketing an experience. When you go to an IndyCar race, the atmosphere is great. For about $100 or so, you can get a paddock pass. You can walk around in the paddock and pit lane an hour before the race starts. You can get up close. You can get into the garages if you'd like. Any team personnel that you run into, you can talk to them. They'd be more than happy to show you around, be more than happy to lend some secrets in terms of what they're planning to do during the race. It's absolutely awesome. Being able to be right outside the garage door while Penske does a gearbox change an hour before the race starts, that's really cool access. And they don't try to cover things up. They don't try to shoo you away. They're happy to have you there. And they know that, well, without the fans, they don't get to go racing. So they really do enjoy the opportunity to be able to show you around and to really just demonstrate their pride in their product. And that's what IndyCar truly has. It's a different kettle of fish from racing in Europe. It's not as exclusive, it's not as avant-garde, if you will, but it's very entertaining all the same. Add some fuel here because we're right on the cusp of running out. No tire change. And I'll also say that when you are at a race and you see these guys going flat out, they go past you at 220 miles an hour, it's impressive. You feel the air being displaced as the car's rushing through it. It's really an exciting thing. Definitely, though, the balance of this thing, the way it responds to your inputs, it's very predictable. You can definitely do long races here in oval trim if you want. No problem. It becomes more of a strategic game with fuel than it does anything else. And of course, you've got to try and stay out of trouble as well. If there's an accident around on start-finish right now, I'm not going to see it until I'm right on top of it. So you do have to be alert. And those of you who are planning to race this car on ovals here in Assetto Corsa, turn the AI aggression down. That's the intel I got from some VRC guys. A couple of days ago, I posted a race here, 40 laps around this place. It was carnage. Turn down the AI aggression and they're going to be a lot more predictable and a lot more civil. All in all, though, I've got to say it's an absolutely wonderful car to drive, both in the road course and oval specs. Does everything you want. You do have to learn about it a little bit. As we found out at Mugello, it will bite you if the settings are not quite right. But just keep at it. Be observant. Keep learning. Keep turning laps. You'll get the hang of it. It's by no means a difficult car to drive, but at the same time, it's not one that's going to bite you that hard either. It does what you want, and once you learn how it works, it is a great car. Absolutely it is. Those of you who don't have this car yet, I implore you, go to the VRC website. Their website's in the description here, and go buy it. It's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. If you don't have the Formula North America pack, go get it. You get all three cars. You get the 1999 car, you get the 2012 car, and you get this one, the 2018 car. It's phenomenal. It is probably the best single mod that VRC have made yet. And yes, I'm taking into account all the other cars that they have made. MP420, MP422, F2007, R25, and the list goes on. All of them are phenomenal cars. This one truly, I think, is their best ever. And it's good that it is, because this is the one that they've publicized the most. And of course, this whole pack, it's really great. It's fantastic that we get contemporary open-wheeled American cars in Assetto Corsa. It really does make this a complete racing sim, because you get a little smattering of everything. You've got road cars, you've got GT cars, you've got open wheelers, you've got Formula 1, you've got Formula 2, thanks to our friends at RSS. You got everything. It really makes Assetto Corsa a great place to get to grips with sim racing, and VRC, you're contributing a big piece of that puzzle. And again, I can only extend my gratitude to all of these guys here at this team that put these products together. And honestly, I'd be happy to pay hundreds of dollars for a mod of this quality. $15 US? Well, I don't think you could really get any better than that. However, I do implore all of you, my beloved audience, to stay tuned for hot laps from Mugello, as well as from here at South Star, from onboard as well as external replay. I do hope that you have all enjoyed this one, and of course, we are going to see you next time with some more Assetto Corsa content. Until next time, though, FerrariMan601 saying thank you very much for watching, and of course, we will see you soon.